Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore, and we're here with a first for us. After many, many years, we've been trying to get Donna Leon either here in person or to do some sort of event, and we're just delighted that she's able to join us today from Switzerland due to the miracle of technology. And Barbara is there in her home office, and she's holding up a copy of the advanced reading copy of Donna's new book, Transient Desires. And I'm here at the bookstore, and I will be disappearing in just one moment, but I just wanted to let you know if you have questions for Donna, go ahead and use the Q&A function, and I'll be popping up towards the end of the program to ask some of your questions. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to you, Barbara.
Thank you, Patrick. I don't know that this is all that visible, but I'm hoping that because we are going to talk about the Giudecca part of Venice, that you can see this kind of working barge, which is part of the story. But I want to go back for those of you who've never talked to Donna before and chat a little bit about her early career. So in 1992, she published this glorious book. I actually have the UK and the US copy, and the British copy is bigger, but it's exactly the same cover art, and it's a very evocative picture of a gondolier. But Donna and I have talked many times about opera. We have emailed each other over the years because we're both opera nuts, although I'm just a fan and Donna is a serious music person. And in fact, Donna, haven't you been working with a small orchestra for years, but it's still going on during the pandemic?
Yeah, I worked with Alan Curtis and Il Complesso Barocco for about 10 years. We did programs together. We did a lot of recordings together. And now I work with, since Alan's too soon departure, I work with a group called Il Pomo d'Oro. Has nothing to do with pizza. It's the golden apple of Paris. It was a 12-hour opera by Cesti that was premiered in Vienna, I believe, at a wedding. And there exists still only one act. It's in a library, I think, in Austria, Il Pomodoro, and it's the kind of Loch Ness monster of Baroque opera. No one knows where the other two acts are. René Jacob says he has them, and he's trying to put together an edition. And my dream is to do this sometime, to have them, maybe not 12 hours. But there was a ballet for 300 horses as well, so maybe we can arrange that. And do a performance of Il Pomodoro, or an abridged Il Pomodoro playing Il Pomodoro.
Well, I can certainly see I can certainly see the attraction of living in Europe as you do, close to all of these opera houses. Would be wonderful. In your not Brunetti books, of which the Transient Desires is book 30, you've written a couple of little charmers, one of which is called Donna Leon, Venetian Curiosities. I've rated my own library bookshelves because I collect all of Donna's books. And this one says music by Antonio Vivaldi and Riccardo Minazzi, conducting Il Complesso Barocco. And truly, if you've ever been to Venice, wonderful illustrations. But if you have ever been to Venice, you can't escape Vivaldi. I mean, they play it everywhere. And then she's written another little book called Donna Leon, Handel's Bestiary, In Search of Animals in Handel's Operas. And I really love the way all these animals are.
This was Alan at his best. We were trying to think of an idea for a book that could have essays and paintings by our friend Michael Sova. And Alan said, well, why don't we do animals? Handel wrote, let me think, tick, 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 33 arias for animals. What? So he chose, I think, 13 of them, and it was glorious fun with two really wonderful singers. And that's easily 10 years ago, if not more.
Well, it's a real charmer, and it does say, and I think this is true, when Donna Leon, the acclaimed author of the best-selling Commissario Guido Brunetti series, is not conjuring up tales of crime and corruption in Venice, she is listening to opera. And it's inevitable, I think, then, that Death at La Fenice, which involves Venice's famed opera house, and a conductor and his demise would be your very first novel. I have to tell you, Don, it suckered me in because one of my true regrets is I've never been to La Fenice, the old one, before it burned down. And I have not been to the new one. So I was unable to resist a book by this title.
Good. I'm glad I got you hooked.
You did, 1992. It was one of our first Mystery Club books, and I think we sold hundreds of copies. But I did want, before we talk about Transient Desires, I did want to mention the other one, which is called My Venice and Other Essays. And if I hold it up closely, you can see that this is a photograph of Donna, and she is in Florian's, the famed coffee shop in, well, it's open all the time, on St. Mark's Square. And I love this photo of you. You look so serious when reading the morning paper. What
Reading
moved
Il
you?
Gazzettino.
What moved? Yes, which Brunetti reads at Casentino when he's stopping off for his own coffee. What moved you to write these various essays about different aspects of the city?
I had a year-long job with a Zurich newspaper to write. It was really a dream job because I could write anything I wanted. Some of them were about Venice, most of them were about Venice, but some were about anything I wanted. So I did drug dogs, Blitz, the drugs dog. I still remember the interview with Blitz, who had, as I remember, 74 teeth, all bared as he was barking in my face, but anything for a story. And there's one about getting something out of Italian customs, and lying to get it out with the complicity of the official who let me out with it, with a piece of furniture that belonged to my late mother. All sorts of odd things, some opera reviews, as I remember. But I don't have the job anymore, so I don't write them anymore.
There's a short line in it, which I think says a lot about the way Donna writes. And so I'm going to read it here. It's very short because I don't expect her to have retained this in her memory. One of the most enticing things about Venice is the sense of mystery it imposes. There's never any certainty about what will lie around the next turning or what will be revealed behind the opening door. Novelists, filmmakers, even the common tourist, who, as you know, Donna doesn't much care for, but we'll skip over that, all have been captured by this haunting sense that things will turn out to be different from what they first appear to be, which I think is a lovely way of highlighting the kinds of books that you write, which are not really traditional detective stories. And, you know, they are. I mean, he's a policeman and there's a crime and there's murder and so forth, but you're always looking at not political issues, but environmental issues, really, and the corruption of the Italian system, which seems to fail them constantly.
Yeah, they deserve better than what they've had for the last 2,000 years. They deserve a lot, and I don't know that their politicians have ever adequately supplied that need.
It's difficult to separate one's enthusiasm for Guido as the driving force for reading Donna's books with her portraits of Venice. The city and the landscape are just, to me, as much alive in a character as Guido and his family are. But also, I've always thought that great novels bring to you issues that you might not have thought of. And I love the way Donna's crimes are usually propelled by some social issue some environmental mostly or social issue she wants to write about. So over the years, we have learned about so many things. I loved your portrait of the lagoons outside the city. What was that, 3 books back? I know I asked you this before when we talked and I've forgotten.
Yeah, Earthly Remains. I think that's the one. That was the one set in the Laguna.
Right. And of course, Venice is facing so many threats, environmental and political and otherwise, that I think you can't ever run out of material.
No. I read the Gazzettino online and La Nuova Venezia online every morning. And each day someone does something that suggests a possible book to me.
Well, the other
because things are so unusual there. Maybe it's because of the water, maybe it's because of the slowness of the city, but many, many odd things do happen. But I suppose odd things happen everywhere.
One of the other things which I meant to mention, along with all those, is that there are lots of literary influences at play in the books. Paula, for example, is forever reading Henry James, which, you know, clearly means that you at least have read some of Henry James, if you're not a gigantic fan. And Brunetti himself likes to read the classics. But when you and I talked a couple of weeks ago, you really surprised me when I asked you about some of your own literary influences, and you replied with a well-known American crime writer. And I was fascinated by that. I've been thinking about Ross MacDonald since.
Well, I think he's one of the best, mainly because of that beautiful, limpid prose that he writes, and how he manages to condense things. He's wonderful on conversation, where people speak as we speak, but he captures it and just sort of presses it into a small snowball of meaning, rather than going on and on and on, as like listening to something in a Trollope novel where they're talking about politics. MacDonald just puts it all together and then boom, throws it in your face. He's also very, very sympathetic to women. And these are books that were written in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. So he really was before his time. And one does sense in, at least I sense in his novels, a real affection for women as they really are. He writes about them with great sensitivity, particularly young women. This might be because of his problem with his daughter, or maybe his problem with his wife as well, or both. But he's terribly, terribly insightful about female characters. I would say more than he is about male characters, which is usually not the case in crime novels. In fact, the opposite is the case. It's the hero, the tough guy, who has a girlfriend who is always, not always, but most often, a secondary character.
MacDonald was famous for saying that Lou Archer was a person that if he turned sideways, he would disappear. He was not powering his books by, I mean, Lou Archer was the detective, but he was, I think, much more interested in all the other characters, and Archer was kind of a point of view. Yeah. But, you know, that's certainly not true of Brunetti, because, I mean, it's impossible to resist him and his family, his children, Paola's parents, Brunetti's mother when we still had her. So I do think the characters are so alive and so interesting, and you've developed them over 30 years. So Brunetti hasn't aged in real time, but what is he now? He's in his 51 or something in Transient Desires?
He's older than he was 30 years ago. Right. Some people are, some people aren't. I'm not certainly, nor are you.
Absolutely not. But I do think that he's, you know, he's changed over time. He's grown darker. He's grown a little more, it's an interesting contrast. He's grown more disillusioned and maybe despairing in one sense, but he's also not one to give up. And this is a case, you often start your stories with things that don't appear to be crimes on the surface. It's not like, you know, somebody is shot out in front of La Fenice or something. And in Transient Desires, it begins with a really odd sort of, well, you tell it, it's your book. Why don't you tell us how it begins?
I get a lot of information, a lot of ideas for books from gossip. There's a limitless well of gossip in Venice, so I suppose in any city there is. And from my friend, the Gazzettino. About 4 years ago, there was an article in the Gazzettino one morning about something that just didn't fit in my head. That two foreign women, they might have been American, they might have been Canadian, I don't remember, young women in their early 20s, were found on the landing dock of the emergency room of the hospital. There were two entrances to the hospital, by the water, where people can be brought in by water ambulances or emergency services, and the one you walk through from Campo San Giovanni Paolo. These girls were left on the dock at 3 o'clock in the morning, both damaged, wounded somehow in some violent way. It turned out that these girls had quite innocently met two Italian guys, and they went out for a ride in the Laguna. And boys in cars, boys in boats, and they crashed into bricola, which are the poles that hold. You can anchor, or you can use a hawser and attach your boat to them out in the middle of the Laguna. They also mark channels. These guys, not drunk, not drugged, crashed into one of these that had broken loose, had floated away, and had floated into traffic. And to hit a log that has a circumference like this at a speed would propel the people in the boat forward, which is what happened to the girls. So they did the right thing. Rather than call an ambulance, they took them to the hospital, but they were afraid of being involved with the police, as are most Italians. And so they left her and they rang the doorbell, the emergency doorbell on the back, the big red thing that you slam your palm on, and disappeared. And there was no sign of them until a couple of days later they were found. But I kept thinking, why would they do that? Why would they take these girls who were injured? They didn't know how badly. And then I thought, what a great idea. That would be for a book. And so I started writing the book, as I start writing all of the books, with not a clue as to where this was going to lead me. But luckily, it has worked a number of times that as I tell the story, I see a possibility opening up where there's a side road that I can perhaps follow. And then that leads me somewhere else, and that introduces other people. And then I've got it. And usually at about, I don't know, page something of the manuscript, 200 of the manuscript, somewhere in there, it finally gels. And I say, oh yeah, that's why this happened. That's who done it. And then I can write the rest of the book with great speed, because the first part, I'm really lost. I'm like those boys out in the Laguna. I don't know where I'm going. There's no light or nothing. And then the light goes on and I can see where it's going. And I've just got to that point with 31. I just figured out after 9 months where the book wants to go, because I didn't know up until now. And so it's always amusing to me when I hear people say, you know, in that book about I knew in chapter 6, when that woman said that this is what was going to happen. And because my mother raised me to be polite, I said, wow, how very astute of you. And I don't say, gee, I wish I had known.
But you know, that's an interesting process. But now that you've written so many books, you have to trust in it, don't you?
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't know that I could make an outline and say, chapter 1, this happens, and then that's, because that's too long. That's too much to remember for me. I'd rather just take it in little bits and pieces and have the book tell me where the inclined plane is, that I can follow more easily and more believably, because it just doesn't have to be easy. It has to be believable, because there has to be coherence between cause and effect. Always.
You spent so much time with these characters that you know how they're going to behave and react. Because I mean, that's another charm of the books, is the whole ensemble cast. You know, Brunetti and his family. I love Paola's parents. I mean, I can never see enough of the Count. I think he's fabulous. But then, you know, we have the people down at the police station. You know, when I was in Venice, I actually went to visit one or two. Thinking about you, I thought I should go and see how this really works, which I liked. But in this book, since you do have these two girls left on the dock of the hospital, and the boys that sped away. It took you to a part of Venice that that may not be so familiar, certainly not to tourists. It's a working part of Venice. In fact, when we talked about it earlier, I said that I felt like it was a good deal like Brooklyn. You know, there are docks and dock workers and the whole bit. So it's called the Giudecca. So why did you decide to move over to the Giudecca for developing the story?
The Giudecca, when I first went to Italy, which was a long time ago, the Giudecca had a pretty seedy reputation. There was another place, San Giacomo dell'Orio, which was the center of the drug trade now. But Venice has suffered urbanization like no other place on earth. And so many of these places, which 40 years ago, people would tell you not to go at night, have now become filled with bars and pizza a taglio, where you buy it and you eat it on the street. Giudecca still preserves not a seamy reputation. The one thing that is characteristic of them is that they are foul-mouthed. I have heard Giudecchini use language that really would take the paint off a piece of wood, which is rare because Italians don't generally use bad language. I hear it very few other places. There are a couple of words that people use in conversation, the way Americans now use like. It's stuck in there for no purpose. It's a meaningless word. But on the Giudecca, there are men, women, children who speak with vulgarity that I'm not used to hearing from Italians. It was a place where the poor lived, where a lot of people who worked on boats, a lot of men who put sacks of coffee on their shoulders and carried the 100-pound sack off the boat. But now it's suffering from gentrification. Many foreigners are there, have bought houses, have bought apartments, rented them. And so the level of service improves. The restaurants get better and more expensive. The little trattorias go up market. The bars get redesigned and reopened. But it still has a very close-knit feeling. You can tell the Giudecchino, Venetians can tell the Giudecchino accent. I can't. I can tell when people are speaking Veneziano, obviously, and I can tell when the Veneziano is very, 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 very dense or very pronounced. But it still has a kind of shady reputation that it doesn't deserve anymore. So I put one of the boys there.
Right. I felt, you know, when you wrote about it, it almost had a tribal feeling. Although I have to say that the image that first came to me, proving how old I am, was Marlon Brando and On the Waterfront, you know, the longshoremen, and that whole kind of culture was because
that's the background.
Yeah. For any of you who don't know what I'm talking about, you could rent the movie. It was Brando's one of his breakout roles. But I mentioned on the cover there is a depiction here of this working barge, and there's money to be made. There's a lot of money to be made transporting goods. I mean, Venice and Istanbul back in when Venice was the major sea power, when most of the goods, luxury goods that came in from the east came through the Silk Road into Istanbul and Venice. And it was only after the Atlantic routes opened that Venice began to fade as a sea power. In fact, I love going to the shipyards there. I think those are some of the most wonderful parts of Venice to explore. But nonetheless, you know, it's a city on the water, so transporting goods would be a major part of it. And these guys, that's what they do. So it's still two boys that you mentioned that they come from this culture, and they're not going to want to step forward and reveal what happened.
No, not at all.
But it's interesting that Brunetti goes over there and he's really out of his depth this time. I mean, this is not a place that he knows. And so I felt like he was kind of off balance for part of this, because it was like terra incognita for him.
Yeah. And it's a rougher culture than he is accustomed to. Although he was born poor, he speaks an excellent Italian as well as Veneziano, and is a cultured man by dint of his force of will. But he could pass as an intellectual or as a lawyer, a judge, or something, because he speaks very, very well, and he knows lots of stuff. He can talk about literature or music or just about anything. One could never imagine his background.
So one of the girls that's injured, or both of them, I think, are American. And one of them is badly injured and has to be in the hospital. And I do think you also bring out the plight of what it is to be injured abroad when you are, not in your own country without your own family support, what it would be like to be in that position. And that I thought that was very moving. And well done. Of course, you're an American who has lived in Venice and Switzerland for a long time, I hope without hospital stays of any duration. So at this point, I don't know that I would even call you an expat, as we say. You seem more like a citizen of Europe.
Yeah, I suppose. I think it's been 50 years since I've lived in the States.
And you lived in Iran before you came, and that must be a weird feeling looking at Iran today from the Iran that you knew back in the 70s.
Yeah, it was a very liberal country, very, very polite, civilized people, and I remain optimistic about Iran because I don't think you can wipe out a culture. I don't think you can wipe out the natural inclination of a nation in a generation or two. Italy's been battered around for 2,000 years, and still that warmness of heart and gentle spirit remains in them. And I like to think that that same sort of warm humanity, which I encountered in Iran for 4 years, is still there, that it's 2,000, 4,000 years old in the Iranians, the Persians case. I hope it's still there.
In 30 books, you've really constructed what I think of as a mosaic of Venice, which for anyone who's never been there, wishes to have gone there, may still go there. I can hardly think of better preparation for that than reading all of Donna's books. I've read them in order in real time. You don't necessarily have to, but there's a wonderful continuity. And the last thing I would like to mention before we open this up to questions, or compliment Donna on rather, is your wonderful style. I mean, aside from everything else, your writing is so beautiful. It really is captivating. And when we talked a little while ago, you mentioned Ruth Rendell to me. And Ruth was an amazing stylist. Do you find that, you think of her, or is she one of the kind of, influences in the way that you write?
I don't know that a writer can really trace back and to a particular, or to 2 or 3 influences. I've spent the last 50 years, I guess, of my life, and 60 years of my life, reading real books. And I think it's like water on a stone. If you're exposed to well-expressed thoughts day after day, year after year, they get worn into your brain, so that the right, I suppose it's like cooking. If you grow up around people who cook very, very well and you taste what they cook, you develop a kind of sophisticated palate. And I think that happens to many writers, that we are created by what we read. And I think that we give back an imitation of, or a copy of, or a continuation of good prose. And I like to think that it's responsible for, certainly for having read all of Ruth's books and MacDonald's books, but equally, or even more so, Austen and Dickens and Trollope and Fielding, Sterne and Smollett. And
what about libretti? Because you've spent so much of your life listening to words being sung. I mean, operatic plots are often so baroque or completely improbable that you can't really use them as the basis of a logical crime novel. But what about the words? Do you hear, from all that singing, things sing in your mind when you're writing?
No, but I do know that Sometimes I give readings in Germany or in Switzerland in German language because of the tradition of live readings. And it's interesting to me at times to hear these books, to hear the prose, and to hear that there is a certain fluidity to it, which is completely automatic. Not in the sense of do, 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 but in the sense that by dint of having read millions of words, the patterns, the arrangements of those words, it is sort of instinctively clear to me that this word has to go before that word, because to put the adjective there and the noun, it doesn't work. It doesn't sound right. I find that interesting too, that when we are reading, we don't say that doesn't look right. We say that doesn't sound right, because we're hearing it in our minds. And I think if you've heard a zillion of them, you are more likely to know what you would want it to sound like.
Well, you're right very incisively, which is why I snickered over Henry James. It was just like verbose beyond all belief. But you also, you have a wonderful way of conveying in a subtle way some of the emotions and reactions, particularly when Brunetti is either with his in-laws or when he's talking to his boss down there at the police station. And you don't hit us over the head with it. It's very subtle, and it's so much fun to read because I can impute my own reactions to what you're saying. I don't have to draw them all from what you have written.
You don't have to hit readers over the head with a baseball bat. I do believe that less is more. This is in my head because it's in the new book. There's a scene where someone breaks into and does vandalizes a veterinarian's studio, clinic. And the next day, Brunetti walks in and he's walking, and she has lots of domestic animals there. And he's walking across the floor of the room where animals have been killed. And he looks down and we're in the narrator's mind, and the narrator says, no. So he saw something that looked like a banana peel, that was shaped like a banana peel. But banana peels don't have gray fur. But it's a rabbit's ear, but it's never named in the book. It's described. And a rabbit's ear would look like a squashed banana covered with gray fur because the shape is right. And I think that's a nice way to say something horrible.
It's lovely. Illusion can be very allusion, not illusion, maybe both, but allusion is so powerful.
Less is more, less is more, less is more. It's so true in writing.
Well, I think we should invite Patrick to emerge from his black hole and talk to us about. He's there somewhere. And I'm sure that your many fans who are watching, many of them have questions or comments that he can reveal to us. Patrick, are you there?
Shall I just be a disembodied voice, or would you like me to appear?
I'll come back out. It's too much like, it's very Shakespearean. Patrick's kind of like, it's like the Tempest, we're calling him up from the briny deep.
Yeah, first of all, what a wonderful conversation. I've really been enjoying listening to it, as have all the viewers. Yes, I do have some good questions here. Several people have asked about the Brunetti movies and how they're slightly odd seeing them with a German cast in Venice speaking German. How did that come about? And is there a chance of there being more?
That's a very interesting question. Next question.
No problem.
No, I wasn't taken with them because they were so German.
Yeah.
And I'm now listening to solicitations from various film production, television production companies, but nothing sounds particularly interesting. And nothing's happening in the movie world because we're all locked down. So it would be only a heroic person or a very courageous person who would, at this point, decide to make a movie anywhere other than in their kitchen.
Right. LJ Roberts, our friend, she asks, would you consider setting a book in the Iran that you knew?
Nope,
That would be fascinating.
no.
9.
No, I don't know enough. I don't know the language. I don't know the culture. I just, it would just be a kind of, written bad tourism. It would be a bad tourist book with a murder.
Let's see. Okay, Tram asks, what was the most difficult Brunetti book you had to write and why?
Oof. The one I'm working on now is difficult. And I think that's a combination of COVID and general lethargy, the resulting lethargy, and the lack of stimulation. I've been pretty much here for the last 10 months. And I can go out walk in the Alps in the snow, but I haven't been to a theater. I haven't been to an opera. I haven't been in a friend's home for dinner. And I think that one's brain or one's ability to do anything gets flabby with lack of exercise. So this book, up until about a week ago, presented a lot of trouble because I just couldn't figure out where all this stuff was going. But now I know. Someplace bad.
We hope so. There are a few questions about COVID, and you just answered part of one. But what has it been like in Switzerland? What's the infection rate there? How are things going?
The infection rate is about average for Europe. The government is constrained by Swiss law to allow people, they can't keep people in their homes. Maybe if a war broke out, they could, but the law prevents that. But people have been increasingly attentive. Everybody wears masks inside anything. A lot of people continue to wear masks outside. There is a vaccine program. I have been vaccinated. I'm happy to tell, but happier to have been vaccinated twice with the Pfizer. And the Swiss are a pragmatic people. They want this to be over. They want people to stop dying and being sick. They don't want to be sick or dying. And I think the situation is pretty well under control here. One would like vaccines to come faster, but they don't seem to be coming fast enough anywhere.
Right. Carl has a nice comment. He says, you did Agnus Dei better and before Dan Brown. You made us aware of the influx of immigrants to Europe before Angela Merkel. You use culture and history to show us modern societal problems before many fully recognize them. Thank you. Just a nice comment.
Thank you. And let us thank Frau Merkel for having not just blah, 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 blah in a book, but she did something. Like it or don't like it, she did something. And there aren't many who have.
Let's see.
She's very high on my list. Up there with Dolly Parton.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Putting her money where her mouth is, right?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Sharon says, I read once that Donna is from New Jersey. How did she find her way to Venice?
Divine providence, I think.
That's so operatic an answer.
Providenza divina.
Right.
No, I got lucky. A woman with whom I had gone to university, who hadn't been a great friend or anything, a friend, but not a close friend. She wanted to go to Rome to study painting. And her mother, who was Italian, wouldn't let her go alone because in 1960, whatever it was, girls didn't go off to, I don't know, Delaware without a friend to be sure that they're safe and that they'd have $5 in the shoe in case they have to take a taxi home. So her mother insisted that she find someone. So Anita, I think she went through the class list and she got to the L's and she got lucky. And she said, you want to go to Italy? And I'm, wow, huh? My family's Irish. And she said, no, I want to go to Italy to paint. My mother won't let me go unless I have some. I said, sure, why not? Let's go. So we went and we stayed with her distant relatives who hadn't been informed that I was coming. I showed up. I was the joker in the pack. And they took us into their home and they wined us and dined us and treated us and revered us and taught me about cappuccino and about Italian food. And I was like Conrad Lawrence's geese. I was imprinted with this generous spirit, fabulous food, wonderful coffee. And I fell in love with the place and with the people. And this was in I think the late 60s. And it hasn't changed. But I still think it's paradise.
Kind of a related question. Why Switzerland? How did you make your way there?
My publisher and agent is in Switzerland and is in Zurich. So all during the years of increasing success, I was very often in Zurich, and I made lots of friends in Zurich. And then there came a time when I just couldn't stand the tourists anymore. I really couldn't stand it. And I decided that it was time, everything comes to an end, that it was time to move. And the one place I knew reasonably well was Switzerland. So I decided to come here. But bear in mind that I am 7 kilometers from the Italian border. I can walk, when I go out walking in the afternoon, I can walk to Italy and come back. Although you can't go in because of it's zona arancione forte or arancione scuro, I don't remember. But the Alto Adige is closed. It's in lockdown.
What kind
So
of
I stop at the border.
what kind of town is it? Is it a smaller town? Can you describe
Yeah,
that?
where I am, it's 350 people, probably more cows than that. It's a small mountain village on the main road between Zurich and Venice. And I was very lucky to find a house that some old people wanted to sell, and I bought it. And I've been here, I guess, 10 or 12 years. And it's nice. The people are friendly, but not overwhelmingly so. And nobody locks their door.
Wow. Sounds pretty wonderful.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, LJ has a question. She says, I love learning that you're not a plotter. What is your writing process? Do you use pen and paper? Do you use pen and paper, or do you use a keyboard? And then this is an interesting question. Do you actually take a break between books, or are you plow right straight through?
I'm losing control of myself. Do I seem like an orderly person?
I don't know. Those pictures look pretty orderly behind you on the wall. Very nice.
Yeah, those are tiles. No, I don't have a program. I just start, and the story tells itself to me. And I usually start in September, and I usually finish in April. And then I give it to my editor in Zurich, and we work on it for a couple of months, a month, 2, depending on how many mistakes I've made. And then during that period, I read. I move to the sofa and I read for 6 weeks or 2 months. And then I have to do the proofing of the book, and then I start the new one. But those are my sofa months are wonderful.
Are you a nocturnal creature, or do you write in the morning?
No, I write when I've had a walk and I've had some coffee and there's nothing else to do. And then I chain myself to the desk and I stay here for some time. I try to get maybe 7-8 pages of manuscript a day done if things are working well. But some days it doesn't happen. Or it used to happen that someone would say, I pray for people to call and say, would you like to meet for a coffee? Yes. Would you like to meet for a yes? Would you like, yes.
Because I do think we should underestimate that Venice. You know, we had a really interesting conversation in September with John Sanford and Carl Hyacin about Miami. And, you know, the consensus of it was that you didn't need to think up ideas. You just needed to live in Miami. And every day stuff happened, you know, crazy things happened or whatever happened. And there it was, inspiration for fiction. And this is a place that would constantly be inspiring stories, whether
I'm
it's
sure
in
that's
the
true, yeah.
Gazzettino, the paper, or whatever. And so really you just have to kind of just catch one as it goes by, so to speak, and then let
True.
it grow.
Every city should have a Gazzettino. I wonder, in New York, it's probably the Daily,
Might be
no,
the
the New York
Post.
Post, maybe.
Yeah, probably the Post. It's certainly not the Arizona Republic. But anyway, no, I'm sure the Gazzettino is great. But just walking around Venice, there's no, I mean, in your honor, I'm sitting here in my shoes that I bought in Venice. They are gorgeous leather and they have wonderful soles and all. And people have said, I can't believe you bought those shoes so many years ago, because it must be like 15 and you're still wearing them. But there's a lot of craft in Venice, and I realize that probably the fashion industry doesn't catch you as much as some other things, but a lot of us thinking of Italy, we think about the fashion industry, we think about the fabulous food, restaurants and provisions and all. So there are all kinds of aspects to Italian life that
There are
never run out.
two shoemakers, really shoemakers, both women in Venice. I hope they're there when I get back.
Yeah, well, but I mean, Italy has a tremendously long craft and artistic heritage and industry, and and Venice certainly shares in that. And so I'm trying to remember, was it you that what about architecture? I mean, you can hardly think about art without thinking about Palladio or somewhere. Well, all the amazing construction technology and now the sea barrier and that controversy, and I mean,
well, the mosaic.
yeah, but I mean, it's a whole universe contained in one city that would just constantly be giving you ideas.
That's true. But I think if you live in any small city where people know one another, Venice has the asset of there being no cars. And so we are constrained to meet people all the time. So I'm sure that most people in Venice know lots of people that they don't know who they are, but they've seen this person, they've watched the person's children grow up, they've watched them get remarried or repartnered without knowing who they are. I find that very, very nice.
Sure. Yeah, there's some more. Let's see. Are there any other authors whose books are set in Italy that you might recommend? And do you read much crime fiction? And do you have any favorites?
Well, my favorites, Ruth Rendell and Ross MacDonald. Those are the two that I go back. Hammett and Chandler. The stories are a mess. Chandler's stories are a mess. But God, he could write. He could write so beautifully. I suppose I'm drawn to the ones who write well, or well as I perceive it, or as I judge it. No, I don't read much crime fiction because I don't have a lot of time to read anymore.
Did you ever read Chandler's Letters?
No, I haven't.
Fascinating. Really interesting.
I am reading. Let me deconstruct my little shelf here. Show you. You see?
Elizabeth Bishop. Okay.
Her letters are breathtaking. She's so good. Equally as a poet, but as a letter writer. Fabulous. Yeah, I'm reading that for the second time. I don't remember what else. Oh, I'm reading a book about the siege of St. Petersburg. It's the diary accounts of the survivors of the siege of Leningrad. And I'm reading Artemidorus, the interpretation of dreams. This is so good. I don't know why I'm reading it.
Can you hold it up a little bit higher? Nice.
Artemidorus, it's Oxford University Press.
Okay.
New translation.
Artemidorus. Wow.
So I go back and forth between Elizabeth Bishop and the Siege of Petersburg, although that's not a great laugh.
Yeah, it's funny that with Chandler and Hammett, it's interesting to read their letters and Chandler just kind of bleeds all over the page, and they're really fascinating to read. And then Hammett, is very just the facts, very clipped and spare.
What are we going to do in the future? Because nobody's going to leave letters behind. Everybody's writing emails.
The collected emails of Donna Leon.
Stop there. I don't want to know.
Let's see here. What else do we have? Oh, there was a question. Let me get to it. Do we know what professions Guido's children will adopt? Will they remain socially conscious?
Yeah, well, they really are ecological terrorists, the two of them. I don't know what they're going to do. I think that Chiara will go into some profession that will help her save the world. She has that kind of idealism and pig-headedness that is necessary. And Rafi, I don't know, he might study something like law, not business. I wouldn't do that to him. Maybe history. I would prefer that when they get to university, they study real things, not technological things.
Actually, I have a question for you. All of your titles are so evocative and interesting. Do the titles, do you start with the title, or does the title reveal itself during the process of the writing?
The title usually comes after, when it's done. And sometimes they are the despair of publishers in other languages, because About Face, for example. About Face is a book in which a person goes through the first half of the book believing one thing until it is revealed to him that that is untrue, and he must change his mind completely. So the book is about a woman who has had lots of facelifts. So it's about face, but it's also about a person who has to do an about face, but it's also about face keeping honor or keeping the sense of self. So Tris, buy one, get two free. But these are the despair of other publishers, because you can do this in English, or I can do it in English, but I can't do it in other languages. Well, I love the ones, or there's another one, Unto Us a Son is Given, is from the Messiah. So it's bitterly ironic, because it's about the decision to adopt a son. They come to me they usually come to me when I'm at the opera, or I'm at a concert, when my head goes somewhere else, and very often the title for a book will jump on me.
Transient desires could go many different ways too.
Yeah, because most desires are transient in life.
And how many languages are your books translated into at this point?
I don't know, maybe 30.
So that's a lot of thinking about titles and artwork and all that stuff in other publishers. Is there anyone that you find more appealing out of that pack, or anyone you really, well, you probably can't say which one you dislike, so let me stick to which one do you like?
The Americans and the Brits, usually those are good covers. The Spanish sometimes have very, very interesting covers. And sometimes the Finns do too, strangely enough. But most of them I don't see, because the copies go to my publisher, to my agent publisher, Diogenes, and I don't ever see them.
Oh, okay.
And strangely enough, I assume that this is strange. I was asked at some other point in these talks for this book if I would read a passage from the book, and I said, well, I don't have a copy, because they hadn't reached me. But then they said, would you read from another book? And I said, well, I don't have them, because strangely enough, during my writing life, I haven't kept copies of most of the books. I don't have them. I don't know why that is. I read them. I'm not going to read them.
Once you're done, it's done.
Yeah, once I'm done, I'm not going to read this book again. why should I have it on the shelf? I might keep a Tementaurus, but certainly not.
Well, luckily for you, I have the entire archive. So
Thank you. If I ever need
desperate-
one, if I ever have to read from one,
Yep, I'll let you know, right? So, you know, it's interesting over since 1992, when Death at La Fenice came out, Donna and I have progressed from letters to emails and now recently to Zoom.
Zooming.
Yep, which will allow us to stay better in touch. But I didn't mention among all the awards and critical acclaim that her series has achieved, the one I remember best was that fortunately I was in London at the time as a member of the Crime Writers Association, and Donna won the Silver Dagger from the CWA. And when it was over, I took her to tea at Fortnum and Mason, which is one of the most British things you could possibly
Yes.
do, right?
Yes.
And I still remember how much fun that was. And that was a fairly early on, wasn't it? I'm trying to remember. I'm sorry, but at my age, I just can't keep up with titles and dates anymore. But
No, 12 years ago, maybe even more.
I think it was more. But in any case, you know, Donna, we've had kind of an international, so to speak. You came to Washington one time too, when you moved to Grove Atlantic. I remember you were there for a book expo or something, and there was a party in your honor. So we've only seen each other a couple of times across all these decades. But the miracle of Zoom is that now we have a better chance to talk. And, you know, once you learn it, it's really a wonderful
You had
technology.
to put that in, didn't you, once you learn it?
Well, you know, it came along just in time to save us. So
Yes.
from real isolation, I don't know what we would do in this, what we would have done over the last few months. Seems like forever, but you know, basically a year without this technology. So I think we've been very fortunate that it has developed. So it's been a treat to talk to you in Switzerland. I'm home in my office. Patrick's down at the Poison Pen.
I have a couple of comments that have come in that it might be fun to.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I thought you were done.
No, I did little
This
fishing.
is when the
for-
hook comes.
Sharon says, she says, this is just a comment. She says, I had to fill out a form for jury duty, and I believe it related to child misuse. It asked the last book that I'd read. I put Tough for the Little Children and never heard from them again. That's awesome, Sharon.
That's either wonderful or terrible. I'm not sure which.
It's kind of both at the same time. And then Gail Yates has a really nice comment. She says, I went into the old Poison Pen as I was leaving for Italy, asking for recommendations, and La Fenice was one of the books that was recommended. So that's nice. Let's see, maybe as a final question, is there any of the characters in your books that you particularly identify with? Or is it all of them?
It's all of them, I think. There's as you might have, I tend to lose control. So maybe this evening, my wise ass nature or part was visible. So that goes into Paula. But the reading and the liking to figure out why human things worked or didn't work. That's very strong in me, and it's very strong in Brunetti. So I think if any of the two characters are present in me, I think it is they. I would like to be represented as well by Signorina Elettra, because I am hopeless with all of this technology stuff. Right? Sometimes I'd like to call her and say, Signorina, could you come up to the first floor? But it doesn't work that way.
What about Count Fiery? I just absolutely love the Count.
Oh yeah, well he's the nice thing about these ongoing characters is to discover more and more about them. There's a scene in Transitional Desires where Brunetti and Grifoni are almost in an argument.
Right.
But then she says something to him, and their friendship becomes more solid. And many of the things that the characters burst out saying, I didn't know about before. So if the other characters are surprised, I'm surprised as well.
That's a wonderful note to end on. So, mille grazie, signora.
Prego, di niente.
Baci.
Ciao.
Thank
Baci a
you.
tutti, a tutti.
I certainly hope it will be a tutti. Definitely. So thank you all very much for joining us this afternoon. And there will be a podcast available that you can share with your friends. So I hope that you will enjoy your copy of Transient Desires.
Someday we will get you out here to the desert, Donna.
Okay.
We would love that.
Well, I'll lure her with the Santa Fe Opera because it's just.
I was
like-
about to say that. I was about to say that.
I've got her number, so we can do that, and we
Up
just
to
kind
cook the
of hop
La
over from New
Posada.
Mexico. It'll be great. Anyway, Patrick, thank you for doing a wonderful job
Yes.
of hosting.
Great
And
choice, Patrick.
I want you to enjoy again. Salute. It is your publication day here. So
Grazie mille.
warmest good wishes for success. And a big thank you to your publisher
thank
for
you.
making this possible.
Thank you for making this possible.
Oh,
Have
listen.
you enjoyed it, Donna? Have you enjoyed the Zoom thing?
Yeah, I'm a convert.
It's kind of fun, isn't it?
Yeah.
Excellent. I'm really delighted. I know I had to speak sternly to you to get you to install it, but once
On more
it
than
was
one
there,
occasion. Yes.
oh, you've taken to it beautifully. And as I said, it's a wonderful tool. So anyway, bye, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon or this evening, depending on where you are. Hello. We hope you're enjoying our programs and podcasts with authors. We'd like to expand them, and your help would be appreciated. Please make a donation at poisonedpenfoundation.org. 100% of the proceeds will go to help connect authors with readers in this difficult time. Thank you.